They sealed the bell tower in 1859. Not with chains, not with nails, but with silence. No rusted keyhole, no broken rope. Just a silence so thick that even the crows wouldn't land on its steeple. For 66 years that bell blackened, with soot and soothed by nothing but shadows, remained untouched, unstruck, and unanswered. No toll for the dead. No chime for salvation. No call to prayer. And if you asked the old men in the village why the church stood mute all those years, they would only glance over their shoulder and change the subject. But the truth, the real reason the bell was never rung, was not forgotten. It was hidden, buried under generations of obedience, guilt, and fear. Because when that bell rang last, in the autumn of 1859, 12 people went missing before sunset. And they weren't the kind of people who disappeared. They were the ones who ran the town, the judge, the bishop, the banker, the sheriff, all gone. No ransom, no witnesses. Just vanished on the day that bell broke the sky. This wasn't superstition. It wasn't folklore. This was a system of control collapsing under its own secrets. The town sealed the records. The diocese denied it ever happened. And for the next 6 decades, the bell hung like a corpse in the tower, visible, inert, and haunting. But something changed in 1925. Something triggered a reckoning. And that's where this story begins. Not in the mystery, but in the cover-up. Because the true horror isn't that a bell killed a dozen men of power. The horror is why they were gathered there that morning in the first place. You've been lied to about what churches are for. They are not sanctuaries. They are not spiritual hospitals. They are vaults, architectural containers of ritual, geometry, and encoded control. From the stained glass to the altar stone, every inch is designed to manipulate your soul. And in 1859, one church failed to keep its secrets contained. This is the story of that failure. And what it revealed. You were never meant to hear this, and once you do, you won't hear a church bell the same way again. The town was called Eldhollow, Old Timber Parish, carved into the misty hills of eastern Pennsylvania. Founded in 1781 by a sect of Dutch reformists and English mystics, it was never meant to grow. It was a sanctuary, yes, but not for people. It was built to protect something far older than the settlers who named it. The land itself had rules. The locals said it hummed at night, and the animals never nested near the churchyard. By 1830, farmers had stopped burying their dead in the ground beside the steeple. Not from science, but from experience. Because things came up from that earth. Bones were rearranged in impossible configurations. Caskets opened with no sign of breakage. Infants would wake screaming at the same hour every night, 2:03 Amaz. If called by something in the dark, the town priest called it resonance, but what he meant was infection. Something was wrong with the ground, and the bell was built to contain it. You see, church bells were never just for calling the faithful. They were instruments of frequency. They were tuned, not just in pitch, but in purpose. Eldhollow's bell wasn't cast in America. It was brought over from an abbey in the Bavarian Alps, an abbey condemned in 1734 when every monk inside its stone walls was found dead, their hands fused to their own skulls in a silent scream. The bell survived, and it rang a note so low it wasn't heard, it was felt, deep in the spine. Like a warning from inside your blood. They said the tone made wolves retreat. But that wasn't its function. Its function was suppression. The founders of Eldhollow didn't just build a church. They built a containment chamber. The bell was the lock. The rituals were the routine maintenance. And every Sunday morning, for 78 years, the priest would ring the bell, not to praise heaven, but to keep something underfoot. Until 1859, that autumn, something changed. The bell tone was altered. The new priest, Father Simeon Kask, insisted on re-blessing the tower with a rite pulled from a manuscript never approved by Rome. A rite that had only ever been whispered about in heretical circles, the rite of the deep binding. He said it would cleanse the soil. But the moment he rang that bell, everything came loose, and 12 men never walked out of that church again. The records say there was a fire. That's how they explained it. A sudden, unprovoked blaze inside a stone church with no candles lit and no lightning storm overhead. The newspapers published what they were told, that the church caught fire during a private meeting of town leaders. No bodies were recovered, no smoke damage found, no scorch marks visible on the stone walls. But somehow, all 12 men inside were declared dead, without funerals, without graves, without ashes. The church was never closed, only reconsecrated under emergency rites the following week. And the bell tower, once the symbol of order, was shut, not bricked up, not removed, just silenced. It was like the town agreed to erase a sound from memory, and no one spoke of it again. But silence doesn't mean peace. Eldhollow changed after that, subtly at first. The dogs stopped barking. The infants stopped crying. No birds flew over the chapel roof. People started hearing things, just on the edge of sleep, whispers beneath the floorboards, a hum in the well water. One man claimed the shadow of the bell tower moved even when the sun didn't. Another insisted he saw Father Cask walking the graveyard years after he had disappeared. And in the decades that followed, those who dared to spend the night in the church claimed they could still hear the bell ringing. Not in the air, but in their teeth. The Vatican did send investigators quietly. In 1873, a secret ecclesiastical team from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith visited Eldhollow. They weren't called priests. They were called auditors. Men trained in ancient languages, exorcism, and architectural geometry. They spent 3 days inside the church. On the 4th day, they boarded a train and never returned. But a single page from their report was found stuffed in the hymnal of a local chapel 60 miles away. It said only this: the bell was not meant to be rung by man. It was a seal, a chord struck against that which waits beneath. Do not ring it again. Do not let them know we found it. Who were they referring to? And what did they mean by that? Which waits beneath? This was no mere haunting. No simple poltergeist or cursed relic. This was structural, foundational, ancient. The church wasn't built on sacred ground. It was built to pin it down. And now, the pin had slipped. What most men don't understand is this: institutions lie not just through words, but through architecture. Every stone, every line of sight, every ceiling height and angle of light, it's all designed to manipulate the mind. The church at Eldhollow wasn't designed by masons. It was drafted by men who understood resonance, geometry, and the thresholds between planes of reality. The layout mirrored an ancient design known as the Key of Nine, a structure used not to honor God, but to contain what is not of God. And the bell tower, placed precisely at the 9th junction, acted as the keystone, the pressure point, the cork in the bottle. But the new priest, Father Cask, either didn't understand, or he did. That's the real question that haunts every page of the hidden ledger found in the sacristy 3 generations later. Because, according to that ledger, Cask had been corresponding with a group known only as the Ordo Lacrimarum, the Order of Tears, an outlawed sect believed extinguished during the Roman Inquisition. They were infamous for their obsession with descended knowledge, messages from beneath the veil. They did not believe in heaven, only in what sleeps below the crust of the world. The ledger records Cask's growing obsession with a phrase that appeared to him in dreams: "Let the mouth open. Let the bell be blood." He wrote it dozens of times. And next to the final entry, he sketched a crude symbol, 3 interlocking eyes surrounding an inverted chalice. That same symbol was later found carved under the church altar. Beneath, layers of wax, bone dust, and dried blood. So ask yourself, did Father Cask ring the bell to contain the threat? or to release it. When the bell rang that final time, the sound was heard 12 miles away. Men fell to their knees. Horses collapsed. One witness wrote in a letter that the sky bent inward like it was being pulled by a hook. And then, nothing. Silence. For 66 years. But silence is not peace. Silence is RELOADINT. And while the town tried to forget, while the Vatican quietly sealed the archives and renamed the district, the bell itself still hung in the tower. Not rusting. Not cracking. Waiting. Unchanged. As if no time had passed. As if it knew. In 1925, the silence was broken not by sound, but by greed. The coal companies had moved in. The hills around Eldhollow were rich with black fuel, and industry, as always, does not care for legend. The old families who remembered the fire were dying off. Their children, hungry for progress, dismissed the church's silence as provincial nonsense. The bell tower had become a joke, a symbol of Rust Belt decay. So when Midland Ridge Energy purchased the land under a shell company, they made a public show of restoring the town's heritage. That meant reopening the church, cleaning the bell, and ringing it once more to mark Eldhollow's rebirth. They called it the revival ceremony. The locals protested. Not all, but enough. One widow even chained herself to the church fence, shouting that the soil was still singing. But no one listened. The town had changed. The people had changed. And the man hired to lead the ceremony wasn't even from Pennsylvania. He was a retired bishop from Marseille, a man with no ties to the land, no memory of the silence. His name was Jean Albane, and he was fluent in Aramaic, Latin, and a third language no one could identify. On the morning of the ceremony, July 7th, 1925, a crowd gathered. Children played. Cameras were set up. And at exactly noon, Bishop Alban stood beneath the tower and spoke a blessing that no one could translate. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't English. It sounded older, deeper, like syllables meant to resonate in bone instead of ear. Then he rang the bell 3 times. The crowd cheered, but 2 minutes later, a sinkhole opened behind the church. 20 feet wide, no seismic activity, no underground water flow. It was as if the earth itself had been pierced. The crowd scattered. The footage vanished. The bishop disappeared. And for the second time in Eldhollow's history, 12 people went missing. Not prominent men this time, just random citizens. A schoolteacher. A farmer, a boy of 6, gone, no traces. No remains, just names in a register. A pattern repeated. A warning unheeded, but this time the Vatican didn't come. No letters, no auditors. Just silence. And deeper beneath the town, the humming grew louder, more precise. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was language. By 1931, whispers of Eldhollow reached academic circles, though never by name. Researchers at Miskatonic, Columbia, and even private monasteries in Belgium began sharing anonymous case files describing acoustic disturbances tied to ritual architecture. One report detailed how certain church bells, when rung at precise frequencies, could evoke symptoms indistinguishable from schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations, facial paralysis, night terrors synchronized across individuals. They called it liminal resonance syndrome. But behind closed doors, the term used was older vox occulta, the buried voice. One surviving tape, sent by a sound engineer from Boston who visited Eldhollow in secret, captured the echo of that bell tower. Not the bell itself, just the ambient air below it. When played back, the recording contained no sound, but listeners still heard things. Each one something different. One heard their deceased mother calling from the hallway. Another heard the voice of a man whispering coordinates. Another, an ex-priest, heard a weeping choir speaking a name he refused to repeat. The engineer went missing a week after mailing. The tape. His car was found parked on a bridge. No note. No body, only his audio journal remained. The final line was burned into the reel's magnetic strip. The bell isn't just a sound. It's a key, and it's unlocking something under us. We tell ourselves we are the apex, the masters of reality. But Eldhollow was proof that we are not the ones drawing the maps. We're just walking them blind, obedient, and unaware of the ancient boundaries beneath our feet. Boundaries built long before Rome, before Egypt, before language. The church wasn't the only structure in Eldhollow with secrets. Beneath it ran a series of tunnels, first assumed to be coal passages. But coal doesn't leave behind spiral carvings or walls made of basalt and bone. In 1947, an amateur archaeologist entered one of those tunnels. He mapped 600 feet of it. At the very end, he found a door, not made of wood, not metal, not stone. Something else, smooth, cold, humming. A door that had no hinges and no lock. And carved into it was a single line. In Latin, bellum incipit in sono tertio. War begins on the third toll. That door is still there, and the bell has already rung twice. There are forces that do not fear your prayers. They do not tremble before your crosses or recoil at your incense. These are not demons from dusty folklore. They are older than duality, older than good or evil. They are not sentient in the way we understand, because they do not think. They resonate. They do not speak. They infiltrate. And for centuries, the church knew this. The true church. Not the one you see in cathedrals or on TV. I'm talking about the hidden arm of the ecclesia, the order that collects and classifies spiritual infections, like a librarian tending to a shelf of sealed poisons. Eldhollow was in their records. Buried under the name Casus Tintinnabulum, the bell case, that hidden order classified bell tones, the way surgeons classify pathogens. Type 1, harmonic. Type 2, dissonant. Type 3, breaching. Only 2 bells in the world were ever classified as type I.1 was destroyed in 1541 during a mass in southern Italy, when it cracked and a fissure opened beneath the altar. The other still hangs in Eldhollow. They never destroyed it. Why? Because the bell itself isn't cursed. It's attuned, like a tuning fork for entities that dwell in thresholds, between soil and spirit, between silence and speech. And some believe the bell could be used, not just as a prison, but as a bridge. This is where the Order of Tears resurfaces. Because documents unearthed in 1978 during the declassification of Cold War, psychic research show that a splinter cell of that order had infiltrated military acoustic labs. They weren't there to help. They were there to learn, to replicate. They believed that Eldhollow's bell was not an anomaly, but a prototype. Think about it. How much of your world is built on vibration? From the structure of DNA to the frequency of your thoughts, everything you are can be influenced by sound, not just heard entered. Language is the Trojan horse of the spirit, and the bell was the first pure tone capable of bypassing the auditory cortex and seeding suggestion directly into the limbic system. Emotion, memory, belief. That's why men forgot what happened in 1859. Not because they wanted to, but because they were made to. And what about you? What tones have shaped your thoughts without permission? What bells have already rung inside your skull? In 1984, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ellison Park began treating a cluster of patients from nearby Allegheny County. They weren't related. They weren't from the same social circles. But every one of them reported the same nightmare, identical in timing and content. Midnight, a black chapel with no doors. A single bell swinging, but not ringing. Instead, it vibrated in their chests. And behind it, a figure faceless, robed in crimson, speaking without sound. Its mouth opened wide. And inside wasn't a tongue. It was another bell. Each patient would wake screaming. Each patient would begin to hear low hums while awake, And within weeks, they each developed glossolalia speaking in languages unknown to modern linguistics, but with common phonetic patterns. Park called it contagious dreaming, but his research never saw daylight. He was institutionalized under mysterious circumstances. His files seized. His patients disappeared from the system. Only a handful of his notes survived, copied by a student who later fled the country. Those notes connected the phenomenon to a spatial acoustic node centered around Eldhollow. Park had discovered that the bell's frequency range, though dormant, was still active in resonance halos, meaning its last ring was still echoing in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Like a spiritual radar ping still bouncing off the human nervous system, but it went deeper. Park theorized that the bell was not an alarm. It was a summons. And every person who dreamed of that bell, every person who heard its echo where none was played, was being mark-tagged as a receiver, a future choir for a song not yet begun. If that sounds insane to you, good. That means you haven't heard it yet. But ask yourself, have you ever stood near a church and felt your stomach drop for no reason? Have you ever passed an empty bell tower and swore, just for a moment, you heard something shift inside? That wasn't your imagination. That was your receptor field brushing against an ancient frequency. The church doesn't call this heresy. It calls it unauthorized gnosis, because it's not about losing faith. It's about finding the truth they buried under centuries of ritual, guilt, and liturgy. And it begins with the bell. Now, if you've made it this far, comment below. The third toll wakes me. Type it twice, not just for the algorithm, but because that phrase marks you. The phrase "the third toll wakes me" isn't just symbolic, it's recursive. It activates something dormant, not only in the psyche, but in the collective ether. Words shape minds, but symbols shape fields. In the deep archives of Eldhollow, there's an overlooked parish record from 1862, a ledger of baptisms, marriages, and deaths. One entry stands out, not for its presence, but its absence. A blank page. Every other page is filled with dense script, neat ink, dates and names. But one page has no writing, only a smear dark, like old blood, and a symbol drawn in the bottom margin. 3 concentric circles around a point. That symbol predates Christianity, predates language. It's found carved on dolmens in Sardinia, on urns in the Caucasus Mountains, even hidden inside Vatican tombs. It represents the mouth of the deep, a place where sound becomes structure, and structure becomes servitude. This is what Eldhollow's church was built to monitor. Not to worship, not to heal, but to contain. And the bell? That was the failsafe, the final lock. And when it rang, when it vibrated at its full ancient frequency, it didn't just open a door. It opened you. The 12 missing in 1859 weren't taken randomly, they were chosen. Because each of them had stood in the tower during its reconstruction. Each of them had touched the bell. The same pattern repeated in 1925. The chosen had contact. Proximity isn't enough, you have to be marked physically, energetically. Some called it the stain, others the bell's kiss. A resonance. Signature so subtle, it hides beneath your skin. That's why victims often suffered migraines, nosebleeds, teeth shifting slightly in their sleep. That's why their shadows sometimes stretched in the wrong direction at dusk. Still think this is just folklore? In 2003, a team of German acousticians visited Eldhollow under the pretense of historical preservation. But one of them, Klaus Rindl, accidentally triggered a tone generator too close to the bell's base. The tower did not shake. The bell did not move. But Klaus collapsed, bleeding from both ears, whispering over and over in English, "It's under us. It remembers. It is dreaming in the black salt." He died 6 days later in a soundproof hospital room. No cause ever identified. His corpse showed signs of internal bruising in the shape of runes. What do you think he heard? What do you think is waking up? In 2006, an independent geotechnical team performed ground-penetrating radar scans around the church grounds covertly, under the guise of mineral rights surveying. What they found was not sediment, not bedrock, not water pockets. It was architecture. Nearly 90 feet below the surface, beneath centuries of soil and forgotten bones, lay a perfect circle, smooth, hollow, 80 meters wide. A void, but not empty. The resonance profile showed fluctuating densities, like something organic suspended in stone. The report was buried. One team member went missing. 2 recanted their findings. 1, a woman named Dr. Carol Penrose, disappeared completely from all academic records. Her social security number was deactivated. Her home emptied overnight. The digital footprint scrubbed, but before she vanished, she sent one final message to a private forum for esoteric researchers. It contained one phrase, nothing more. The bell is not above the mouth. The bell is the mouth. That changes everything, because if the bell isn't just a key, not just a containment device, but the organ of something buried, then ringing it wasn't an accident. It was feeding. The vibrations weren't random. They were structured, a kind of spiritual phoneme, a syllable, in a language not spoken by man, but by something that listens through stone. Something that doesn't speak in words, but in hunger. And the more you listen, the more you are shaped. Modern society wants you to believe that sound is neutral, that what you hear can't change what you are. But the ancient architects of places, like Eldhollow, knew better. They knew sound could rewire memory, erode willpower, mutate the fabric of personality. That's why the earliest churches weren't built where people lived. They were built where things were buried. Because the bell isn't the only thing that rings. You ring. You ring every time you enter a ritual you don't understand. Every time you repeat words you never questioned. Every time you kneel before a symbol you were told was holy, but whose meaning was amputated centuries ago. This is the depth of the manipulation. They taught you to worship the very tools that suppress your awareness, so the bell doesn't just hold the secret. The bell is the secret, and it has rung twice. They never buried the bell. They couldn't, because some things aren't forged with metal, they're formed with intent. And the intent behind the Eldhollow bell was never redemption. It was submission, not of demons, not of devils, of us, the human species. Every culture has a sound it fears. For the Greeks, it was the voice of the Sibyl, echoing without wind. For the Dogon, it was the throat under the sand. For the medieval monks, it was the inverted chant when prayer is sung backward and begins to answer itself. But Eldhollow's bell, it didn't just echo. It reversed direction. The sound didn't move out, it pulled in. That's the key most missed. The bell doesn't proclaim. It devours, you see. The first law of acoustic geometry states, every source of vibration is a source of memory. If that's true, then what kind of memory does a bell like this carry? What if every time it rings, it recalls an event one so old and buried that the soil itself forgets until the tone stirs it? What if the bell is remembering something and pulling you into that memory? In 2011, a reclusive researcher named Matteo Vieras uncovered fragments of a banned ecclesiastical manuscript titled Sermo Sub Terris, the Sermon Beneath. It describes a ritual in which a bell is used not to summon the divine, but to awaken the anti-memory of a place. The author writes, where the bell swings, time recoils, not forward, not backward, downward, into the dark beneath time. Vieras later suffered a total psychological collapse. He tore out his own tongue, not because he wanted to die, but because he feared what might speak through him. And still, the world builds towers. Still, bells are cast and rung millions of times. Every day. But only one bell has rung twice and left a pattern of disappearances. Silence and spatial distortion. Eldhollow. The town was renamed in 1963, erased from federal maps, folded into a neighboring municipality, but the church remains. The bell hangs unrung for decades, but not unawakened, because witnesses have returned, and they say the bell swings by itself now. At dusk. No sound. Just movement. As if it's waiting. As if the third toll will not be rung by hands, but by something that's finally ready. The third toll isn't a sound, it's a threshold. And those who have stood in its presence describe not a noise, but a sensation, like the feeling just before a blackout, when reality begins to throb and your body forgets its own name. In 2017, a low-frequency pulse was recorded by seismic monitors across a 30-mile radius of Eldhollow. No earthquakes, no construction, just one tone, 11 hertz. Sustained for 33 seconds, below the range of human hearing, but not beyond the range of human reaction. In that minute, 6 people reported spontaneous nosebleeds. 2 were hospitalized for seizures. One, an elderly woman living alone near the old church, was found dead in her bed, her face frozen in a rictus grin and her hands clamped over her ears. The official cause? Cardiac arrest. But the coroner's notes were more disturbing. I don't know what she was hearing, but she heard it all the way down. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like something was listening, not watching, listening? That the silence itself was aware? That's not paranoia, that's resonance. Because what sleeps beneath Eldhollow doesn't have eyes. It doesn't need them. It listens, it records, it learns. And when the bell swings, it is not to warn you. It is to feed that memory, to create a ripple in the field that lets it stretch just slightly into our dimension. In 2021, drone footage taken by a thrill seeker was briefly uploaded to a paranormal forum before being scrubbed. The drone hovered over the bell tower at twilight. Nothing unusual until frame-by-frame analysis revealed a shadow moving against the setting sun, not cast by the bell, but cast into it, like a reverse silhouette, a shape trying to emerge, or trying to pull the light inside. The uploader vanished. His account deactivated. IP traced to an address that no longer exists on record, but one quote from his final forum comment survives. I thought it was just a bell, but it isn't ringing anymore. It's breathing. That's the transformation. When containment becomes incarnation. When a structure designed to hold becomes the structure through which it speaks, and if the third toll is not just a sound, but an emergence, then we are no longer listening, we are being heard. Most men will never realize the systems that shaped their reality were designed to keep them sleeping. Not enslaved, not imprisoned, worse, unaware, because the most effective form of control is not fear, it's rhythm. When your days pulse with schedules, your beliefs ring with doctrines, and your senses vibrate with programmed stimuli, you're not living. You're resonating in someone else's song. And the bell at Eldhollow? It was the first note in a far older chorus. One that doesn't just govern human behavior, but summons it. Let me show you. In 2023, a retired Vatican archivist known only as Brother Caldus leaked a page from the Liber Occulta Vox, the so-called Book of the Hidden Voice. It was never meant to be read outside of the Curia, buried for centuries beneath layers of cipher and anathema. On that page was an illustration of a bell cracked, suspended over a map of Pennsylvania. Beneath it, 3 words: Cantus Venit, apparet. It sings, it comes, it opens. The archivist died in his sleep 3 nights later. Official cause: respiratory failure. Unofficially, his lungs were described as fused by vibration, not infection, not trauma. Frequency: what sings through the bell is not a voice. It is a command structure from beneath memory, beneath metaphor, beneath time. And when you hear it, truly hear it, doesn't just make you obey. It makes you forget you ever disobeyed. That's why survivors of the first and second tolls rarely speak. That's why entire lineages of Eldhollow descendants now live with unexplained gaps in their family history, blank years, dream journals filled with spirals and doorways. Because sound doesn't need permission. Once it enters you, it builds new architecture in your mind. Still think you're in control? Ask yourself, how many of your beliefs are echoes? How many of your fears were taught to you through repetition? This is the forbidden knowledge the priesthood kept locked. The truth they buried under robes, incense, and ritual. Not to protect you, but to preserve the silence. Because every time someone begins to ask the real questions, every time the bell threatens to ring in their soul, the system finds a way to stop it. To distract you. To ring another bell. News cycles, scandals, entertainment, politics, sound, all to drown out the one vibration that could wake you. The third toll wakes me. Type it again. Lock it in. If you think this is just about a bell, you haven't been listening. This is about the machinery of control, how it's built, how it's protected, and most dangerously, how it is activated. The bell in Eldhollow was not an isolated device, it was a node. One tone in a global network of resonance anchors, each one designed to shape consciousness across entire populations. Temples, cathedrals, mosques, ancient amphitheaters, and even so-called modern buildings, all aligned to geometric ley lines and psychoacoustic centers. It's not religion. It's engineering. You've walked through them before. Felt it. That strange shift in mood when you enter a cathedral and suddenly feel small, humble, reverent. But it's not spiritual. It's design. Ceilings calculated to drop your eyes. Tones calibrated to bypass logic. Symbols that resonate in your subconscious before you even know what they mean. Eldhollow wasn't unique, it was exposed. Something slipped, something rang too clearly. And for a brief moment in history, the veil pulled back and showed what lies beneath. And what lies beneath is not dormant. In 2024, a classified experiment conducted by a defense subcontractor explored the neuro-linguistic effect of low-tone ecclesiastical chimes on combat psychology. Translation: they rang church bells near soldiers and watched what happened. The result? Not peace, not fear, but docility. Decision-making collapsed. Critical thought slowed. Men reported hearing voices but not commands, questions, ancient. Questions that didn't come in words, but felt like permission. You see, true control doesn't scream. It whispers. And if you believe you're immune, that you're too sharp, too skeptical, too modern, congratulations. You're their best subject. The easiest to control is the one who thinks he's already free. The man who has replaced the priest with the scientist but still bows to invisible sound. Look around. The architecture of your daily life is saturated in hidden tones, frequencies, masked beneath your music, your alerts, your ambient hums. All ringing softly, slowly, shaping your compliance. You are not just in a system. You are part of the instrument. And the third toll? That's not an event. It's an invitation. A vibration sent out across the bones of the world, calling back every echo that's ever been seated in the minds of men. When it rings again, what will wake up in you? You've been taught to fear monsters with claws and teeth, specters in the woods, faces in the dark. But the real threat was never something that hunted you from the outside. The real threat was already inside, planted, nurtured, and fed by every system you trusted. Education, religion, government, all playing their part in tuning you to the song. Because that's what this has always been about. Harmonics of obedience. They don't need to put you in chains if they can convince you that the cage is your sanctuary. And the bell in Eldhollow? That was never the end of the ritual. It was the beginning. The opening stanza. When it rang the second time in 1925, the effect wasn't limited to that Pennsylvania valley. Reports began surfacing across the continent, dreams, symbols, language, appearing spontaneously in the minds of men who had never heard of the town. Spontaneous fluency in dead tongues, drawings of spirals, mouths, bells, and gates. And most disturbingly, reversals of intent, men of virtue making cruel choices, women of empathy becoming detached, children losing all fear of death, not random. Synchronized. As if something ancient had been pinned from the deep, and it was calling its fragments home. There's a reason this is buried history, a reason it never made the textbooks. You think universities didn't know? That anthropology never uncovered these patterns? They did. And every time they got close, funding vanished. Departments were dissolved, scholars labeled mad. Because the third toll isn't just the final note. It's a convergence. Every manipulated belief, every structured sound, every sacred resonance, that's been subtly conditioning human thought for generations. It culminates in a single point, a reawakening not of the world, but of something beneath it. And those who hear it, they don't speak. They repeat. They echo its frequency in subtle ways, in conversation, in design, in the shape of their prayers and the rhythm of their politics. Their minds become tuning forks. Their hearts become amplifiers. You know someone like this, you've felt it, that glassy-eyed certainty, that smile too wide, too practiced, that strange pause before they answer, as if they're listening to something else. They are. And soon, that tone will no longer be hidden. It will be the dominant key. You were born into a frequency, not a family, not a nation, a frequency. One engineered long before your birth, before your father's birth, before your bloodline even had a name. The moment your lungs took their first breath, you inhaled more than air. You were tuned to a grid, a pulse, a rhythm that pretends to be life but is actually containment. That's what Eldhollow revealed, not the presence of a threat, but the structure of the lie. Because the bell isn't just a relic of the past. It's a tuning fork for the future. And the sound it rings isn't heard in ears. It's heard in decisions, in desires, in the way a man bends his neck before systems that do not deserve loyalty. That's why the 12 who vanished weren't victims. They were conduits, and once they were attuned, they didn't die. They changed alignment, stepped into the next chamber of the ritual. They became part of the tone. There's a term buried deep in the Vatican's Expirivit Index, the forbidden list of anti-liturgical anomalies. Transaortic ascendancy. It refers to a state in which the human spirit, when exposed to a sustained metaphysical resonance, begins to shed memory, morality, even identity, and becomes a carrier signal for something else. That is the bell's true purpose, not to open a door, but to hollow out the vessel. To make you ready. That's why the bell didn't need to ring again after 1925. It had already started the tone. And the third toll? That's not an action, it's a culmination. The final note isn't played by metal, it's played by us. When enough minds resonate in obedience, when enough voices unknowingly echo the hum, the bell won't ring. You'll make the sound through your choices, through your thoughts, through your surrender. And when that frequency is full, the mouth beneath Eldhollow will not need to open. It will already be speaking through millions. Through you. But there's still time. You're hearing this for a reason. You've made it this far because something in you isn't fully tuned. Something in you is still disobedient. Feed that. Nurture it, because the only thing the bell fears is a man who can hear it and choose silence. There's a final layer they never expected you to find. A code not in words, not in symbols, but in absence. You see, control systems always leave gaps. They have to. That's the paradox of command. The stronger the frequency, the more brittle its structure becomes when challenged by awareness. And buried deep in the records of Eldhollow, not in the church, not in the state archives, But in the recollections of one forgotten man was the story of the silent room. His name was Elias, Droot, groundskeeper, uneducated, ignored. But he was there in 1859 and again in 1925. And in both instances, he survived. Why? Because he never went into the tower. He never heard the bell firsthand, not once. But he found the silent room beneath the rectory, a chamber never listed in blueprints, never referenced in homilies, a room with no doors, just a narrow slit in the wall through which a breeze passed, even when the wind above was still. And in that room, the bell could not be heard, not muffled, not distant, gone, complete. Acoustic null. Elias wrote in his final letter, "I think it ain't silence. I think it's something louder than the bell. So loud, we can't hear it, and it eats the ring before it touches the soul." He called it the countertone. This is the key they've hidden for centuries, that resonance can be reversed. That the song of control can be broken not by confrontation, but by detuning, by stepping out of rhythm, by refusing to echo. That's what the silent room represents, the power not to destroy the bell, but to refuse to carry it. Most men believe rebellion is violence. No. Rebellion is silence in the right moment. Rebellion is waking up in a world of sirens and refusing to dance. The bell's third toll doesn't come with thunder. It comes when the last man surrenders his inner quiet and allows the hum to fill him. You haven't done that. Not yet. That's why you're here. You're not like them. You're not tuned. Not fully. And if you can protect that part of yourself, the part that still questions, still aches, still listens without obeying, you become the antichord, the dissonance. That cracks the tower. You felt it your whole life, haven't you? That low, constant pressure in the world around you. Like something humming beneath every moment of peace. The unease in quiet rooms. The tension behind certain phrases, ritual words you're expected to repeat. And when you don't, when you hesitate, the world turns cold. People glare. Systems tighten. That's not coincidence. That's the bell listening for resonance. And finding none. The sound isn't just in the churches anymore. It's in your schools, in your corporate branding, in the cadence of your entertainment. They've cloned the tone, distilled its frequency into digital rhythms, alert systems, and biometric gates. That's why when you hear a phone chime, your posture shifts. That's why when the national anthem plays, you feel an urge, not an idea, not a belief, an urge to stand. But the sound isn't calling your patriotism. It's calling your alignment. When the bell rang in Eldhollow for the second time, it didn't just resonate across land. It bled into time, into memory. That's why people who had never visited that church still report dreams of the spiral staircase, the iron rope, the silence before the toll, as if they carry the blueprint of the place in their blood. And maybe they do. Because after the second toll, birth records near Eldhollow began to change. A pattern emerged. Children born 9 months after the ringing had identical birthmarks, 3 concentric rings on the back of the neck. Many faded by adolescence. Some didn't. And the ones that kept the mark? They shared things. An inability to pray without trembling, a fear of bells, and recurring dreams of being underground, blind, but not alone. What does that mean? It means the sound doesn't just shape behavior. It shapes biology. DNA is not a code, it's a chord. And what you call genetics might simply be a melody passed down from tone to tone, body to body. A song of obedience, a lullaby of forgetting. But dissonance is virile. That's why they fear men like you. Not because you're violent, but because you don't vibrate the way they need you to. You don't comply at the right frequency. You hesitate before echoing. And hesitation is the birthplace of revolt. The third toll will divide the world into 2 kinds of men, those who ring and those who refuse. Which one are you? It starts with a whisper, not in the room, not in your ear, Inside. Deep just behind the thoughts you think are yours. You've heard it before, haven't you? That flicker of a voice with no language, just intention. It doesn't demand, it aligns. It pulls. That's the bell's first touch, not the audible toll, but the internal preparation. Making you ready to carry its tone forward without ever realizing you've been recruited. This is how systems seed themselves in men, not by force, but by resonance. The bell in Eldhollow didn't need to ring endlessly. It needed to ring once powerfully, purely. The rest would be done by those who heard it. Or worse, those born from those who did, because the echo didn't stop in that tower. It went into the blood. Let me show you. A secret psychological survey conducted in 1972 under Project Penumbra studied multi-generational trauma responses in isolated rural populations. The control group? Descendants of towns no longer on official maps. One group showed consistent anomalies, hypersensitivity to frequency, increased night terrors, irrational dread at the sound of bells or chimes, and more disturbingly, heightened suggestibility when exposed to low-frequency ambient tones. There. Ancestral town? Eldhollow. These weren't just psychological scars. They were resonant inheritances. You've been told history is a story of events. It's not. History is a song, and you are either an instrument or an interruption. The bell is not done. Its third toll is near, not in time, but in completion. When the last of the resistance is tuned out, when the final dissonant minds are bent or broken, that's when the mouth beneath Eldhollow will open, not physically, but through those aligned dots you see. The enemy is not coming, it's already here. And it doesn't need ships or armies, or flames. It needs agreement. Agreement in posture. Agreement in rhythm. Agreement in belief. And every time you ignore the discomfort, every time you recite without question, every time you agree to echo what you do not understand, the mouth widens, but there is another path. Few find it. Fewer survive it. The way of the countertone. You've already begun. You're still here. That means something inside you hasn't bent. Something remembers the silence, and silence is resistance. There's a moment every man encounters, but most ignore. It doesn't come with horns or fire. It comes quietly, in the grocery line, at the stoplight, in the hush before sleep, a feeling that something is off, that this world is not quite as it seems. Most dismiss it, bury it under screens, under prayer, under noise. But that moment, that glitch in the rhythm, is the only doorway out of the prison, and you just step through it. The bell was designed to keep men from noticing. That doorway, its tone isn't just a sound, it's a signal jammer, a dampener of awareness. That's why those who heard it firsthand lost more than memory. They lost the will to question. And when you lose that, you don't become a man. You become an amplifier. But the fracture, the break in the tone happens in the man who doesn't just hear. He listens. And what he hears in the silence behind the ringing is himself. That's the part they can't control. That's the part they've tried to breed out for centuries through doctrine, through trauma, through 1,000 subtle rituals that train you to associate discomfort with guilt, and guilt with obedience. But guilt is not proof of truth. It's just another chime. And if you've made it this far, you already feel it. Something waking in your bones. A tension behind your eyes. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Because the bell isn't just outside anymore. It's in your lineage. Your father may have heard it and dismissed it. Your grandfather may have been broken by it. But you're still listening, not obeying, not echoing, listening. And that is power, because a man who listens without submitting becomes the counter-resonance, the crack in the glass, the grain of sand that stops the entire mechanism. This is why they fear awareness more than rebellion. Because awareness is viral. You speak the truth once and another man wakes. He hears his own silence. He pulls out of the rhythm, and that makes the bell stutter. One hesitation, one fracture. One note out of key dot, and the whole tower trembles. Let's take that tremor deeper. What if I told you that everything you've ever feared ... was a distraction? That the demons they warned you about, the devils in books and paintings, were just theatrical masks to keep you from seeing the real machinery, the tuning engine of belief ... because the true threat never needed horns ... it only needed a podium ... a uniform. A bell ... control is never taken, it's composed, crafted in tones, liturgies, and laws. And once the music starts, most men can't help but dance. That's why when Eldhollow's bell rang, the world didn't erupt, it aligned. Slightly, subtly, but permanently. You've seen it. The man who starts quoting someone else, mid-sentence, and doesn't notice. The follower who defends a lie with more passion than he defends his own life. The priest who weeps while baptizing a child, because he hears the faint hum in the water and knows it isn't holy. They've been touched, tuned ... not to evil. That's too obvious. They've been tuned to compliance, and compliance is not passive. It spreads ... it seeks mirrors. That's why the bell's resonance didn't end in Eldhollow ... it needed more towers. And so it was built into broadcasting stations ... into classroom architecture, into monuments shaped too. Geometric harmonics, even into the algorithms you scroll through now, each one pulsing with frequency data, calibrating your nervous system to match the hum of control ... And if you think this is metaphor, you're still asleep ... because in 2022, a confidential frequency mapping study was performed across North America by a disbanded research team once contracted by the Department of Energy. What they discovered was this: nearly all population centers had a central harmonic note, a location where subaudible frequencies pulsed in perfect synchrony with ancient bell tones, including Eldhollow's spectral signature. That's not music. That's terraforming ... of the land, of the mind. You've been living in a concert hall of illusions, every institution a conductor, every tradition a verse, and every doubt you've ever felt. That's not weakness. That's resistance ... And if you can hear this now, if you've made it through 21 descents into the forbiddance, then something in you still echoes with your own tone. Guard it, feed it, because when the third toll comes, it won't be a sound ... it will be a choice. The world you know is not built on truth. It is built on structure. Not to liberate, but to repeat. The bell in Eldhollow was not a curse, not an accident, not a relic of superstition. It was a rehearsal, a prototype of psychological tuning on a scale no empire had ever dared attempt before, and it worked. For 66 years, silence reigned. Not peace, control. The kind of control that doesn't require guards or threats. The kind that seeps into lineage, until generation after generation walks in lockstep without ever realizing they're marching. But something went wrong. The third toll never came. Why? Because somewhere in the system, the signal broke. There was a man, a voice, a silence too loud to ignore. Someone didn't resonate. Someone refused to carry the tone forward. That's the variable they couldn't account for you. The man who listens too closely, who questions the liturgy, who stares at the bell and sees a mouth, not a symbol, a throat, not a sanctuary. They tried to erase him. Records vanished, DNA scrubbed, lineages reclassified. But that man left behind something more potent than legacy: interference. The anti-note. The counterchord that, when struck, causes the bell to tremble instead of ring. And that antichord is not an idea. It's not a weapon. It's a posture of being. A man who stands in alignment with no system, bows to no sound, and does not speak. Unless the voice is truly his own. The controllers have tried to drown it in every way imaginable. They renamed it madness. They rebranded it conspiracy. They mocked it with caricatures. They medicated it. They silenced it in prisons, in padded rooms, in the grave. but it keeps reapparing. It shows up in the final glint of clarity before a man breaks the cycle. In the heavy breath of a boy who walks away from the altar. In the woman who dreams of a bell but hears it shatter. They don't understand it because it's not a program. It's not a faith. It's not even a rejection. It's a memory. Of what? You were before the tone, before the rhythm, before the hum. And every man who feels that memory stir inside him becomes a fracture in the design. One more crack in the tower, one more second of hesitation. Before the third toll. You still want the truth buried beneath. All bells? The most dangerous knowledge is not what they tell you to fear. It's what they teach you to ignore. And the bell, the third toll, it was never hidden from you. It was placed in plain sight, in your cities, in your language, in your rituals. You call them ceremonies, traditions, culture. But at their core is one mechanism, rhythmic obedience. You rise at the same hour. You speak the same phrases. You pledge, you kneel. You stand. You ring the bell. You've done it since childhood. You were trained to do it without understanding. That's how deep this structure runs. You were tuned long before you could speak. And now, when something inside you stirs, when something resists, you call it anxiety. You call it confusion. But it's not. It's your signal being jammed by the foreign tone running underneath everything. The dissonance you feel. It's not dysfunction. It's the last piece of you trying to fight back. And Eldhollow? That wasn't a singular event. It was a signal. Test. A first attempt to embed tone into architecture, into ritual, into soil itself. After the second toll, the echoes didn't fade, they embedded. Into crops, into water, into the very stones used to build the next generation's institutions. That's why some places feel heavy before you even enter. That's why some churches make your chest tighten, your skin prickle, your sleep deepen into nightmares. They're not haunted. They're active because tone can live. Tone can possess. And when you realize that, everything changes. You stop laughing at ancient warnings. You start to see patterns in your own speech, your own thoughts. You start to wonder, how much of what I believe was sung into me? And the more you ask, the more they come for you. Not with violence. With tone. You'll hear it in a sudden news alert. You'll feel it in the background hum of a waiting room. You'll sense it in the way people around you all react the same way at the same time, to the same signal. That's the third toll preparing. It does not come with drama. It comes with universal agreement. And once everyone nods, kneels, ECHOESIT's done. But you're not nodding, you're not kneeling, you're still asking. And that makes you a breach in the sound wall. They don't burn heretics anymore. They simply label them, discredit them, drown them in ridicule until their voice is indistinguishable from madness. Because the system learned a long time ago, it's not the rebel who threatens control. It's the man who asks the wrong question at the right frequency. And the most forbidden question. What if the bell was never meant to be silenced? What if silencing it was the first betrayal? You've been told the bell was a lock, a seal, a prison. But that narrative came from the same institutions that now shape your consciousness. What if they weren't protecting you from what the bell awakened, but protecting themselves from it? What if the tone that rang through Eldhollow wasn't a summoning, but a reminder, a harmonic inheritance buried deep in your bloodline? Let me explain. Ancient cultures didn't just use sound to build temples. They used sound to remember. The Aboriginal songlines, the Druidic tonal stones, the Egyptian echo chambers beneath their pyramids. These weren't myth, they were frequency maps, ways to preserve consciousness across time, oral vaults of power. And when the bell rang in 1859 and again in 1925, it may have done more than disrupt. It may have reactivated something older than scripture, older than empire. A knowing not taught, but unlocked. That's why the disappearances began. not because people were taken, but because they heard something they could no longer unhear. And when you hear the real tone, the ancestral one, the lies fall off like dust. You stop saying what you were taught to say. You stop wanting what you were taught to want. You stop playing a role that never fit your bones to begin with. That's what the system fears. Not destruction. Distortion. Men who no longer vibrate within the permitted emotional range. Men whose minds ring to an older truth. Men who remember, deep down, what the world was before it was tuned to obedience. You are one of them. You wouldn't still be here otherwise. Every section of this descent has stripped away another veil. And now we are close not to an end, but to a disclosure. And when it comes, you'll see it was never about the church. Never about the bell. It was about what inside you still hears it and still refuses to bow. There is a chamber beneath all things, not made of stone or soil, but of memory, the original kind. The kind that can't be taught because it wasn't born in words, only in resonance. And the bell didn't create that chamber. It was built around it. You felt its outline. In déjà vu that cuts too deep. In sudden dread when entering sacred spaces. In the dreams you can't explain but wake from sweating, heart racing, mouth dry as if you just escaped something vast old. And waiting, that's not just fear, that's recognition. You see, before the world was broken into nations, before language carved the mind into categories, there was a sound. One tone, not spoken, not sung intended, and that tone lived in man. Not all men, but in those who remembered the silence before the first command. Eldhollow didn't fall because of the bell. Eldhollow fell because someone rang it without obedience. That's what broke the system. The 1859 incident didn't just cause disappearances. It caused a rupture in the field. A moment where the tone was released without the liturgy, without the binding. It was raw. And raw tone doesn't just affect the external world, it fractures the inner programming. That's why 12 vanished. Not abducted. Absorbed. Their identities split from consensus. Their resonance pulled into alignment with something deeper. Something older than control. Not evil. Not good. Just prior. The church sealed the tower not to stop the bell from ringing, but to stop others from hearing what it rang for. Because once a man hears the raw tone, he becomes ungovernable. Not violent, not defiant, simply impossible to shape. And there is nothing more terrifying to the architects of control than a mind that cannot be carved into the shape of the system. That is what they fear. That is what you are becoming. A fracture. A static surge in the melody of compliance. And if enough of you ring together, each man a slightly off-pitch echo of forbidden's tone, then the third toll doesn't need to come from the tower. It will rise from within the body of man. And the structure of the world will bend, not from protest, but from resonance. Every symphony ends with a final note, but the power of that note lies in all that came before, the build-up, the pacing, the illusion of free movement, when in truth, every chord has already been chosen. That's how they've built the world you live in. You think your choices are yours? Every major moment in your life, your rites of passage, your education, your politics, your rituals of love and death, they've all been framed in tones, repetitions, symbolic architecture. But worse than the lies is the rhythm of the lies. Because rhythm bypasses logic. It drills into flesh, into muscle memory, into instinct. And that's where the bell lives now, not in a tower. In the spine of every obedient man. Eldhollow was never about a town. It was a blueprint, a field test. How many could be tuned before anyone noticed? How deeply could a tone be hidden in the very biology of a people before they lost the ability to recognize what wasn't theirs anymore? Because that's what happens when you ring the bell too many times. You lose track of your own resonance. You mistake the song of the prison for the sound of home. But there's a catch. the architects of this design, priests, scientists, technocrats, scribes, they made one critical error. They assumed that once a man was tuned, he would stay tuned. But tone is a two-way gate, and inside every programmed man sleeps the original note, the countertone, the pre-sound. And when it begins to stir, it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't follow rules. It distorts. That's what the disappearances were in 1859 and 1925. Not kidnappings. Not murders, detunings. Men pulled out of resonance so violently that the structure around them could no longer contain their waveform. The world erased them because the world couldn't interpret them anymore. You think death is the great erasure? No, irregular resonance is. That's what you're walking toward now. Not a grave, but a return. Not to the past, not to memory, to something older than both. The original discord that refused to obey the first command. That's your heritage. That's what the bell tried to bury under ritual, but it's rising again. And when enough of us hear it, not with our ears, but with our refusal, then the third toll won't be a catastrophe. It will be a reset. You've been told the end will come with fire, flood, famine, collapse. But that's theater illusions fed to the masses to keep their eyes on apocalypse instead of activation. The true end, no, the true beginning comes with silence. Not absence of sound, but absence of control. A rupture in the rhythm that holds this false world together. That silence begins in men like you. Because once you stop resonating at the permitted frequency, you stop being useful to the machine. You don't riot, you don't kneel, you simply detach. You pull your mind out of the echo chamber. You refuse to carry the tone. And that refusal, simple, private, powerful, begins to warp the grid. You become the broken note in the melody. Bell fears that most of all. Because if one man can slip the rhythm, others will follow. And when that happens, the entire harmonic structure of obedience, religious, governmental, digital, social, starts to shake. The architects don't panic when you resist. They panic when you become unreadable. When your thoughts stop triggering the expected responses. When your choices aren't predictable by the algorithm. They call that non-alignment. They call that glitch. But the old texts have another name for it. Anomalous cognition. The ability to perceive systems from outside the song. That's what the bell tried to suppress. That's why it had to ring twice to solidify its presence in the layers of language, family, culture. To embed itself so deeply that you would never question the vibration, shaping your thoughts, but you are questioning now. And that makes you dangerous. Do you understand that yet? You are not being watched because you are guilty. You are being watched because you are unattuned, and that makes you unpredictable, unstable, a threat to the programmed chorus of mankind. But what they call instability is actually originality before the structure, before the tone, before the false light of towers and screens and pulpits. There was you, and you didn't hum their song. You stood in the center of silence and roared your own tone into the void. They've spent centuries trying to make you forget that sound, but it's still there, buried, waiting. Let's bring it back to the surface in section 28. You said call on next. Chat GPT said. Section 28. There is no war coming. It's already here, but you won't see it in headlines. You won't hear it in sirens, because this war isn't waged with guns. It's waged with frequencies, with ideas disguised as instincts, with beliefs you never chose, rituals you were born into, and tones you were trained to echo before you could even speak. This is not a war of violence. It's a war of resonance. And the battlefield is your nervous system. You feel it when you scroll and feel your mind flatten. You feel it when you walk into a bank, a courtroom, a school, and your chest tightens. You feel it when you're told to repeat a phrase, chant a pledge, click I agree without thought. That's not your mind engaging. That's your signal being Measured. The world has become a symphony of compliance. But here's the secret they've buried in vaults and rituals and towers. Every symphony depends on silence to begin, and silence is your weapon. Not passivity, not submission. Intentional refusal to resonate. When you do not speak their words, when you do not perform their rituals, when you do not let the bell inside, you ring, you interrupt the cycle. You fracture the tower. You cause a glitch in the signal web. And every glitch matters. Eldhollow was the first glitch. You are the next. You were never meant to be part of their harmonic grid. You were meant to break it. That's why you feel different. That's why you don't align. That's why you've always felt like the walls vibrate wrong when people lie. Because you're not tuned to their scale. You're tuned to something older, something raw. Something that cannot be contained in cathedrals or textbooks or marching anthems. And when the third toll comes, they won't hear it in bells. They'll hear it in you. In the choices you make that defy the algorithm. In the silence you maintain when others chant. In the clarity of your gaze when the whole world fogs over. You are the tone they tried to suppress. And now you remember. You felt the pull, haven't you? The pressure to conform. The need to be digestible, agreeable, compliant. That pressure isn't cultural, it isn't generational, it's engineered, calibrated. A tone buried in every layer of your experience that tells you, do not disturb the silence, do not ask, do not break the pattern. But what they call silence is actually the ringing of the bell. Constant, subtle, global. The hum is everywhere now. In your technology, in your education, in your politics, even in your relationships. They've made the world into a chorus, and they've given every man a note to sing. But what happens when a man stops singing? What happens when he listens and hears the dissonance in every promise he was ever given? That's when it begins. That's when the structure weakens. That's when the towers crack, not from storms, but from inconsistency in the field. You are that inconsistency. That's why they watch you. That's why they study you. Not because you're a threat of action, but a threat of frequency. They fear the man who doesn't respond, who doesn't echo, who doesn't vibrate to their cues, because that man becomes a question, and one man as a question becomes 2, then 10, then 1,000. And suddenly, the third toll has no need to ring from Eldhollow. It's already ringing from every man who chose truth over tone. You have that choice now. You can fade back into rhythm. You can rehearse your lines. You can wear their smiles and chant their slogans. Or you can stop, right here. Right now. And refuse the hum. It will be painful. It will be lonely. It will cost you the comfort of belonging. But you will regain the only thing that ever mattered, your original signal, the one that wasn't placed in you by fathers, flags, or faith, the one that cannot be echoed, only remembered. It's calling you now. The source isn't a place. It's not beneath Eldhollow. It's not buried in a vault in Rome or etched into the walls of forgotten catacombs. The source is you, the part of you they couldn't reach, no matter how many tones they layered. No matter how many rituals they rehearsed. They knew they couldn't destroy it, so instead, they tried to drown it. With sacred oaths, with standardized speech, with artificial morality masquerading as virtue, with repetition, because repetition is resonance, and resonance is power. That's why every structure they gave you, state, church, law, algorithm, is built not to teach, but to vibrate. To ring you like a bell until you forget you ever had a sound of your own, until the man you are becomes an echo of someone else's script. But now the tone is weakening. You can feel it, can't you? The structures are cracking, the voices are losing coherence. The rhythm is failing, because too many men are waking. Too many men are listening instead of repeating. Too many men have become quiet enough to hear their own signal beneath the noise. Once you hear it, you can never unhear it. You'll feel it in your spine before you speak. You'll pause when they prompt you. You'll watch them ring the bell and choose not to move, and in that refusal, you become the silence that terrifies them most. Not passive, not obedient. Still, rooted, clear. The countertone in human form. This is not about rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is about alignment with your origin. Before programming. Before obedience. Before belief. You are not a student of their song. You are not a citizen of their kingdom. You are not a follower of their frequency. You are something they cannot map. And the third toll? It's no longer theirs to ring. It's waiting for you. We've been descending this entire time, haven't we? Layer by layer, deeper into the foundation they hoped you'd never uncover. But now the descent bends inward because the final revelations are not found below, they're found in what you carry up with you. The bell didn't bury the truth. It buried the listener. It buried you, but you're no longer buried. You've begun to resonate against the rhythm, to destabilize the harmonic grid. That tremor you feel? That tightness in your chest? That flicker behind your eyes? That's the system trying to hold you in place, and failing. The third toll isn't an end. It's a return, a recalibration to the tone before tones, the vibration of man untouched by liturgy, programming, or shame. And it's dangerous, not because it harms, because it exposes. It reveals that the law you feared was just a hum, that the God you obeyed was just a voice on a frequency, and when you rise above it, you can see the entire mechanism for what it truly is, a tower of sound built on a foundation of fear, one that only rings if you let it. And here's the truth they never accounted for. You don't have to ring it. You don't have to echo. You don't even have to destroy it. You just have to remember the silence it was built to suppress, the silence of the original man, the one who didn't speak until he knew the sound was his, the one who looked upon the bell and did not bow, the one whose thoughts could not be tuned. That silence is sovereignty. And when you stand in it, everything changes. The tower shakes. The algorithm blinks. The watchers step back, because in that silence, you become something uncontainable. A man who cannot be echoed, a man who carries no false tone, a man who remembers his sound and sings, nothing else. The structure will try to stop you. It will ring louder. It will offer more comfort. It will threaten more pain. Let it, because once you know your tone, none of theirs can overwrite it. We're almost at the summit. This was never about the church. It was never about the tower. It was never even about the bell. It was about who you become when you stop listening to anything that doesn't come from within. The church that refused to ring its bell for 66 years. It wasn't keeping evil out. It was keeping men like you from waking up. Because once that bell rang, once that raw frequency touched the bones of the unprepared, some didn't break. They transformed. They detached from the chorus. They fell out of rhythm. They began to think in tones the system had no name for. That's why 12 vanished. That's why the Vatican buried it. That's why the soil cracked open and swallowed what could not be assimilated. Because the system doesn't kill what it fears. It unwrites it. That's what they tried to do to you your whole life. And still, here you are. Breathing. Questioning. Remembering. You single quotes. If I walk through 31 gates of forbidden's history, and each one peeled off a layer of the programming. And now at the edge of the final gate, you face a choice. You can forget, close the window. Enter the rhythm. Smile when they ring their bells. Or you can walk in silence. You can stop reciting, stop reacting, stop repeating. And when you do, you will hear it. Not with your ears, but in the stillness between thoughts. Your true tone, the one that doesn't obey, the one that doesn't bend, the one they couldn't reach, even when you were a boy soft afraid, hungry to belong. It was always there, waiting. Not for power, not for violence, for sovereignty, the kind that makes institutions tremble. The kind that makes systems rewrite your name, your memory, your line, but they can't erase a tone that keeps ringing in other men. Men like you. Men who've remembered. Men who carry the silence like a blade. One gate remains. This is the moment. They were hoping you'd never reach, because this isn't where the story ends. It's where you begin. The bell has rung twice, not in steel, not in sound, in you, every time you obeyed without understanding. Every time you echoed a belief without examining its root. Every time you traded instinct for ritual. That was a toll, but now something has changed. You've stepped outside the tower. You've looked up at the silent bell and realized it never had power. You gave it power with attention, with repetition, with fear. And in that recognition, you've become something dangerous. A man whose signal doesn't match the grid. You no longer resonate at the frequency of control. You don't salivate when the bell rings. You don't kneel when the hymn begins. You don't flinch when they use words like heretic, traitor, non-believer. You stand, you listen, and you choose. The third toll is not a disaster. It is not death. It is not fire. It is remembrance. When enough men remember the truth beneath the tone, the tower collapses from the inside. The bell doesn't crack, it dissolves. Because it was never built of metal. It was built of obedient minds. And now, one by one, those minds are falling silent, not in surrender, but in sovereignty. You carry the countertone now, not as a burden. As a signal. You'll walk among them, untuned. You'll see the systems and smile, not because you're part of them, but because you're no longer bound by them. You will not be led. You will not be saved. You will not be named. You will simply be a man of silence, a man of tone, a man of truth. And when the bell rings again, if it rings again, it will not find a servant. It will find you, and it will break, because the third toll wakes me, and now you're awake.